And this would be the Zoom session for 250, April 3, 2018. I guess this is going to be Unit, what the heck do we call it? Unit 6, where we're talking about today's real ear. And we're jumping off from yesterday's real ear. In our lab session, I think I even mentioned some things about today's real ear. So anyone who did attend the lab on April or March 30th on Friday, you may have had somewhat of a preview to some of the PowerPoint slides here. But what I'll show you here is notes in PowerPoint as per usual. And let me collapse this. Here we go, looking at our notes, newer real ear concepts. And this is especially over the past 10 years. Now, if you look at the top paragraph here where we're talking about stimuli, old versus new, and the old real ear always used either two things, sweep tones, as it says here, or composite broadband noise. It was either brrrr, brrrr, going from low to high, or else it was kind of like a broadband pink noise. Then they started using a really weird stimulus that stopped and started. Kind of went beep, 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 and that was meant to imitate the stops and starts of speech. So today, most real ear uses speech or speech-like stimuli. Sometimes it's of a foreign language. Sometimes it's called ISTS or something on the Oracle system at Springfield. I know that there's all kinds of choices of real ear stimuli to use. Some people even use the live voice from a spouse or significant other. That's always nice, warm, and fuzzy, but it really isn't always the best because it's not the same from person to person. So it's kind of nice to personalize with that. There's nothing wrong with that, but really when you're fitting according to target, you should use the pre-recorded speech stimuli or speech-like stimuli. Today's real ear bypasses R-E-U-R. We'll first read this and then I'll go into the PowerPoints and describe. So first the meat and potatoes and then the dessert. At any rate, today's real ear measurement bypasses REUR. Recall from earlier notes of Unit 5, Audiology at University of Western Ontario in Canada, the birthplace of DSL, took a dim view of real ear insertion gain. The targets provided by most fitting methods are based on thresholds, and thresholds are obtained with headphones. Now, I'm really getting to the italics here, and I really want people to put a star by this and to underline it or somehow circle this, okay? Once again, the targets provided by fitting methods are based on hearing thresholds, and hearing thresholds are obtained under headphones. One of the whole underpinnings of the DSL fitting method is that real ear unaided response is bypassed when testing with headphones, because with headphones you plug up the ear. Therefore, you've destroyed the REUR. So the gain targets proposed by most older fitting methods were based on threshold measures that didn't incorporate REUR in the first place. And so they said if our real ear insertion gain is to be used to match some gain target of a fitting method, then you should have obtained your unaided hearing thresholds in a sound field. Because only when you test in a sound field and you have no headphones on, only then do you have the open unaided ear canal, whereby you measure REUR. But we don't test adults in a sound field. Headphones obscure real ear response, and inserts ruin it for sure. So, all righty. And it says here, because today's REM bypasses real ear unaided response, it also then bypasses gain. So insertion gain is yesterday's news. So functional gain is yesterday's news. Insertion gain is yesterday's news. Now we're on chapter 3, today. Today's real ear. Older fitting methods, like now are, assume linear hearing aids. Now, I would put a star and underline that puppy as well. When you're talking the old, always think linear, okay? When you're thinking new, think compression. Old fitting methods were based on linear hearing aids. Old real ear was based on linear hearing aids. Today's methods, compression. Today's methods, real ear assumes compression as well. New fitting methods, compression. New real ear, compression. And what is compression in a sentence? Different gain at different inputs. Instead of the same gain for a whisper and for average speech and for loud speech, which is exactly what linear hearing aids did, and you matched the gain, or you made the linear hearing aids deliver sufficient gain to hit the target of the fitting method. And what was your input level? Average speech intensity. 55 dB HL, 65 dB SPL, either one, okay, the same thing. Your input was average speech, and with average speech input, you wanted to provide the proper amount of gain, and your hope was that the output would be sitting nicely in the listener's dynamic range. And so, linear hearing aids were set to deliver around half gain. Burger a little bit more than half gain. Libby a little bit less than half gain. Now R less than half gain at the lows and highs and more than half gain at the mids. Okay, but whatever, all wrinkles of half gain. And that those targets were for inputs of average speech. So that you could tell a linear hearing aid wearer because his hand was always at the volume control of his hearing aid. Because if the sound was soft, he had to crank it up, and if the sound was loud, he had to turn it down. Well, today we have compression. And as you may be already note in the dawning and budding of your young careers, when you're looking at hearing aids today, you'll be hard-pressed to see a volume control. Most hearing aids don't even have them. They use compression. They provide more than half gain for soft inputs, around half gain, depending on the fitting method, for average inputs, and less than half gain for loud inputs. Okay, so back to share screen here, and look at the notes where it says that. Today's real ear measurement assumes compression. Compression gives different gain, different outputs for different inputs. As a result, one often sees 3 targets for soft, average, and loud inputs. And those numbers I would commit to memory because those are averages used by all kinds of real ear systems. So old fitting methods had 1 target. Today's fitting methods have 3 targets. Yesterday's real ear showed 1 target. Today's real ear shows 3 targets, okay? So newer real ear uses only one of the 3 acronyms we studied last week. REUR, throw it out the window. REIG, throw it out the window. The only one used is real ear aided response. Oh yeah, look at this. The thumb, the forefinger, and of course the bird. Real ear insertion gain, out. Real ear unaided response, out. Real ear aided response, yep, that's the one you want. Okay, so now let's look at our PowerPoint slides and see what we got. Real ear systems, as you know, come in all shapes, sizes, and colors. Never really think that one's better than the other one, okay? I really like the Audioscan system, and it's not just because I'm a Canuck, because basically I'm a dual citizen. Parents were born in the States. I'm a US citizen as well as a Canadian. I like Audioscan because it's simple. That's my main thing. The Oracle is good too. It's just got lots of bells and whistles, but it's all right too. There's nothing wrong with it. You know, they're all different systems. This is the oldest real ear system I've ever seen, okay? Audioscan ancient, Audioscan new, and this doesn't even look like Audioscan anymore. It's different now. So manufacturer's first fits are a shot in the dark, as we all have said before. Okay, when you blow this picture up, this is the game you are playing when you don't do real ear. Okay, basically, the fitting software in no way ensures audibility. The fitting software is only a guide to get you to where you want to get. Fitting methods predict, real ear proves. Fitting methods are a wish list, real ear measurement is verification. So basically over here, I got to get rid of that top bar. There, go away. Now, today's real ear measures and in situ output. So here's a typical view of a real ear, okay? Today's real ear, and it's not the Oracle, this is Audioscan. And it's only showing one target. If you take a peek here, you'll see one target, and it's the plus signs. We could show more, but we just hid the other targets. Remember, it's got 3 different targets, but we just hid the target for soft, and we hid the target for loud. And we're showing the targets for average inputs. And you can see that on the lower right. Speech, average, 65 dB SPL. SII, that stands for Speech Intelligibility Index. Don't worry about that. I'm not here to talk about that. So, but the higher the number, the better. Now, if you're looking at this line over here, minimal audible pressure, this whole graph is in dB SPL, SPL going up along the sides. So the threshold that you're seeing here for the right ear is the thresholds you obtained under headphones, and then you're adding minimal audible pressure to it to get these thresholds in dB SPL rising up as you go to the right. So your thresholds in dB HL plus your minimal audible pressure at the bottom here equals your thresholds in dB SPL. Now, I'll say that a third time so that when I put that on the final, everybody's going to get that correct, okay? Your thresholds in dB HL plus minimal audible pressure at the bottom of the screen equals your thresholds shown in dB SPL on the SPLogram or on the speech map, okay? Good. Now the green bar over here is just unaided speech. LTAS, long-term average speech spectrum. And no hearing aid was worn by this person. And so therefore, only the parts of speech that are audible are the low-frequency vowels on the left. The high-frequency consonants literally fall below the guy's threshold, so he can't hear them. So now you have a tool for counseling. Notice on the right here it says BTE. That's the style of the hearing aid. Why did they choose style? Mic location effects. On a BTE, the mic is on top of the ear. On a CIC, the mic is buried inside the concha bowl. If the mic is buried inside the concha bowl, you get the added benefit of the concha resonance. Okay, if it's on top of the ear, you don't. So the mic location effect plays a role. On ear is the Audioscan's method of calling real ear. That's what they call real ear. So when you see mode on ear, that just means real ear. Presentation, whatever. Format, graph, whatever. Scale in dB, SPL. Age, adult. Transducer, in other words, the headphone, inserts. Average uncomfortable loudness levels, average real ear to coupler difference, bone conduction thresholds were not added, binaural is not included, okay? But make sure we understand how to read this graph. The asterisks are loudness tolerance levels. The plus signs are the target for average inputs in this case. The fitting method is DSL5 for a child. Wow. For a child. Well, what is it for an adult? Whoa. I don't know. We'll see. Real ear measures today. Well, we actually did cover that before, so we really don't need to look at that, basically. But for an adult, what do you think the targets would be? They would be a little bit lower, wouldn't they? The targets would probably be, if you follow my cursor, they would be following probably about 5 or 10 dB below, because children need more output and gain than adults do. So it's just something to keep in mind. Real ear measures today largely use in situ REAR. In situ just means in situation, hearing aid in place. That's all it means. So basically all you're doing is REAR. And you'll do REAR 3 times. You'll do REAR to try and lift this green speech here so that the mean, follow my line right here, so that the mean hugs the targets. That's what you're going to want to do. And that's going to be one of your REARs. Then you'll do a second REAR, and you'll want the mean, if you follow my cursor, you'll want that to lay just barely above the hearing thresholds. And for loud inputs, you're going to want the mean here to never go above loudness tolerance levels. Basically, that's what you're doing. Real ear measures today are actually easier than old REAR minus REUR. You just have one measure, outputs, real ear aided response. Nobody cares about gain. Gain is just a means to an end. Output rules. It is the groceries delivered to the tympanic membrane. And as I've said before, output is like, did you get the bread from the store? Gain is like, did you ride your bike to the store? Did you walk to the store? Did you drive to the store? Did you fly? Did you take a train? Who cares? Did you get the bread? Okay? Output is king. Gain is just a means to an end. Nobody cares about gain anymore. The audiogram, hearing loss reduces dynamic range, as you know. So make this picture your friend as well. Be sure to look at it. It helps to digest today's real ear. Normal dynamic range from 0 down to about 100. Reduced dynamic range from now the hearing loss to UCL. Notice the UCLs didn't change. Notice the MCL is roughly in the center of both of these dynamic ranges. Linear hearing aids, be sure we understand how to read this graph. It's an input-output function. It's a fictitious hearing aid I made up somehow one day when I woke up. It says it's giving 60 dB of gain. 0 in is 60 out. 20 input, 80 out. 60, and these numbers got slid, okay? But 40 in, 100 out. 80 in, 120 out. So the gain is always 60 in this case, okay? Never think linear hearing aids give the same gain for all frequencies. That's a common mistake a lot of people make. It's not true. You could make a linear hearing aid give a rising response like this, a flat gain response this way. You could change what a linear hearing aid did in terms of its frequency response. Linear just means it gives the same gain for all input intensities, okay? So if it gives this kind of a frequency response and it gives this much, it's going to give this much frequency response to a whisper and the same to average speech and the same to loud speech. Whereas compression is going to give this much to soft, this much to average, and this much to loud. Okay? And I'm showing less in the lows and more in the highs in this case, which is what most hearing aids do. So always remember to separate frequency from intensity that way. A lot of people, I always ask a true-false question every midterm and final exam in this course. So you can bank on this one, okay? Linear hearing aids give the same gain at all frequencies, true or false? And the answer roundedly is false, okay? You won't believe though, every year there's always a few people that write down true, and I'll just like, Anyway, linear hearing aids, okay? Now this is the old way too. Okay, functional gain, ancient news, yesterday's history, but please appreciate it because this is the first way and they didn't have real ear. Okay, so they stuck to a rule that they made up, and the first one was half gain, and the second one was burger, and the third one was pogo, and the fourth one was Libby, and the fifth one was now, And they are all children of that original half gain. So Burger, the A's might be higher at 2,000 and 3,000 hertz. Pogo, the A's would be the same, but probably less for the lower frequencies. Libby, all the A's would probably just be 1/3 above the thresholds. Regardless, the philosophies of the fitting methods were all the same, namely, so that output speech would sit nicely in the dynamic range of the listener. They couldn't see this, they just hoped that it would happen. H-O-P-E. That's what they had the faith, F-A-I-T-H. And the love. Okay, so then came early real ear, which left that away, but it kept the same targets. The fitting methods didn't change. So notice the target here is exactly the same as the letter A's. Okay, just to highlight that fact. It's not that the fitting methods changed. It's just that instead of using the client's hearing loss as the anchor, they used the client's real ear unaided response as the anchor. And then they wanted the aided response above it, so that real ear aided minus unaided equaled the insertion gain. And the insertion gain would be exactly the same as the letter A's here, okay? It's just that this is non-behavioral, while this was behavioral, okay? So it was a terrible tool, however, for counseling, because it just does not describe the benefits of the hearing aid. And it doesn't really teach clients that why they would want to amplify. And Seawald didn't like that. That always bugged him. So he looked at an audiogram like this on the left, and he said, oh, that's just great, but let's make hearing loss and hearing aids speak the same language. Let's change the hearing loss in dBHL into hearing loss dBSPL. And let's make the numbers go up. So he drew minimal audible pressure at the bottom, and this is, remember, in dBHSL, SPL I should say. So remember that the black dashed line is 0 dBHL, and he took the hearing loss in dBHL, added MAP, and you get the hearing loss rising now. And now look at the little dynamic range in the highs, and it gets a little bigger in the mids and a little bigger in the lows. And here's what LTAS would be. On the left, as you saw, the same thing as in slide 1, or almost slide 1. Okay, there you go. LTAS, okay, only now I'm drawing it in orange. Same thing. Okay, once again, to this listener, only the vowels are above the hearing loss, the consonants are not. And what you're going to want to do with the hearing aids is make sure that unaided speech is lifted so it's nicely in the client's dynamic range. So now you have a much, much better teaching tool. Now you have a counseling tool. Now you can look at this picture over here is the same thing as this picture over here, only flipped upside down. So if you take this and you turn it right side up, you'll actually get to today. And that's, I guess, what I was trying to say in lab on Friday as well. So today we read in terms of output, and the purpose of this picture is just to highlight that fact. So let's look at it for a second, and then we'll talk turkey, okay? Let's see if I got a slide that can show you. I'm wondering if I got that or not. I want to hang on a second here. Let's see if I've got it in my picture here or not. Yeah, I do. Perfect. Let's look at this picture. I find this one very instructive. Here we go. Here's 3 targets. You can see on the left, the green targets. You'll see an output for loud inputs. You'll see an output for average inputs and an output for soft inputs. And look on the right, you'll see your multi-inputs, 50, 70, 90. Recall, input plus gain is output. So let's look at 1,000 hertz. Let's do a little exercise here. Go to 1,000 hertz and look at the output right where my cursor is, and look at the output for a 90 dB input. Okay, this is fitting software, by the way. This is actually out of Unitron. And you'll see 3 targets, and you'll see this purplish brown line, I guess, and a blue and a black. That's just indicating where the hearing aid would meet target. It's just telling you, oh, the hearing aid's going to match targets pretty well. Okay, but focus on the green. So the green is as where I'm circling here is the target. So if you look at that, what was my output? With 90 dB input, what was my output? And if you see where my cursor is, you'll see it's about 95. So if I look to the left, you can see where it's about 95. Well, if my input was 90 and my output is 95, what's my gain? 95 minus 90 is 5. So I've got 5 dB of gain happening right where my cursor is. Let's look at the middle green line. What's my output at 1,000 hertz at the middle green line? Well, if here is 75 and this is 90, I'm going to say probably 85. So if we say if we have a target output of 85 and my input is 70, what's my gain? 85 minus 70, 15. Okay, now let's look at the bottom one. 1,000 hertz. Let's pretend this green is right at 75, just for sake of illustration. So if my target output is 75 and my input is 50, what's my gain? 25. So you can see that the gain here, where my cursor is 25, the gain here is 15, and the gain here is 5. Less and less and less and less gain as my inputs go up. All right, so essentially, that's what we're trying to describe over here on this slide, okay? So look at the output in purple or reddish right here. Inputs at 90, input at 70, input of 50. You're looking at 1,000 hertz. 50, 70, and 90 dB SPL inputs plus gain equals output. So if you look at your output here, it's about 95. And what was my input? 90. So what's my gain? 5. Look at the middle one. Okay, my output is 85. My input was 70. What's my gain? 15. Over at the green, my output is 75 at 1,000 hertz. My input was 50. My gain is 25. So when you're reading in outputs, it's kind, because the bottom output is always the target output for soft inputs. And the top output is always the target output for loud inputs. It kind of makes a lot of sense. It's just easier. The bottom one's for soft, the middle one's for average inputs. This is the target output for loud inputs. All nice, okay? Loudness growth. Hearing loss versus sensory neural loss. That's why you want your gains to go down, down, down. As your inputs increase, you want your gains to decrease. My cursor on the right, as my inputs increase, I want my gains to decrease because of this. Because of that graph, because with sensory neural loss, the ceiling doesn't change, the floor goes up. So I need to amplify soft sounds by a lot, average by less, loud by little, or nothing at all. And seen here too, same picture. The only difference between this picture and this picture is that this one here doesn't have frequency on it. This one does. Okay, so here's a hearing loss on the left, and here's the same thing shown in dBSPL. So this bottom blue line, blue curve is MAP. Okay, so the bottom blue line is 0 dB HL. And looky here, look at the bottom red line. This is where the guy's floor is elevated and his ceiling is not. So the range of red is half of what the range of blue is. And that's the same thing as showing this here. His dynamic range got smaller. So highlighting that fact once again, if your hearing loss is around 50 and your input sounds are 5, well, sure, you can amplify by the full degree of the loss, because 5 and 50 is 55, no problem. And if my input is 60 and your hearing loss is 50, I want to amplify 60 by a bit, okay? But if my input is 90 and my hearing loss is 50, I don't want to amplify 90 dB inputs at all, by very much at all. And so you can see the arrows on the right. The green arrow is longest, the yellow arrow is shorter, the red arrow is the shortest. And I guess the yellow arrow would be similar to around half gain. Similar, again, depending on the fitting method. So this, in my opinion, is the most important slide of the entire PowerPoint, right here. This is today's real ear, and this is what they're all trying to do. Hearing loss, 3 different targets. And whether it's DSL5 or whether it's NAL, NL1, or NAL, NL2, essentially, this is what they're after. You want to aid soft inputs so they're barely above threshold. Because people with hearing loss normal hearing people, I should say, can barely hear soft speech. So why should the person with hearing aids be any different? Average speech, you're looking at raising up the outputs, but basically not halfway. Very, very important. I'm going to change the tenor of my voice even. You want aided outputs to be about 1/3 above the thresholds. Not half. Half is too much. Half is kind of like DSL4 used to do. I know that, on various slides, you're going to see stuff looking like this. It's very important right here, this slide. Notice how MCL is sitting right in the center? Okay, look at MCL. It's right in the middle. And MCL here, it's right in the middle. For some reason, when aiding somebody, we don't want to aid speech so that it's sitting right in the middle. We don't. No fitting method does anymore. DSL4 did. And many people thought it was too powerful, and Seawald ended up having to, in kind words, put it down. Okay? Basically, we no longer fit like that. Basically, today, we are generally fitting so that aided inputs, average inputs, 65 dB SPL or 55 dB HL inputs, we want those inputs to be aided so that the outputs are about 1/3 above the thresholds. Sometimes even a little bit less than 1/3. Okay? So this is really the take-home message I want to convey today. It's very important that we internalize and digest this, because a lot of people forget this, or they say, don't lose your way too much. Most fitting methods are trying to do these 3 things that are shown on this slide. This is called speech mapping, and it's what's done all over the world today by people who are doing real ear. So linear gain, WDRC, remember this slide? Have an idea basically what linear gain did. This slide is just to help you review the whole reason why we're amplifying less and less and less as the inputs go up. We're giving less and less and less gain, okay? So the whole reason why, let yourself read this, okay? Note the 1-to-1 input-output ratio, a 45-degree angle line. Linear gain means the gain stays the same for all inputs until maximum allowable output is reached. So read what it says on the left. 0 dB SPL input plus 50 dB gain, 50 dB SPL output. 20 in, 50 dB of gain, 70 output. 40 in, 50 dB of gain, 90 dB output, and so on, and so on, and so on. What frequency does input-output graphs represent? 2000 hertz. Okay, remember that from previous courses or earlier on in this course. Okay, wide dynamic range compression now. Contrast that to this picture. So now look at what compression's doing. Note, linear gain only for very soft inputs up to 40. WDRC occupies for loud average and louder inputs. As inputs increase from 40 to 100, the outputs increase by only half as much. Okay, at WDRC I should say occurs. WDRC occurs for average and louder inputs. So look where my cursor is, right at 40, which is a low knee point. And notice the red line, a low compression ratio, low and low. Okay, this is for mild to moderate hearing loss, where the damage is caused by outer hair cells, and outer hair cells amplify soft sounds by a lot. Okay, so in a way, WDRC is an electronic imitation of the cochlea. You're imitating what the outer hair cells used to do. And notice the linear gain, which is the most gain, is provided for soft inputs, 0 to 40. So if the hearing aid had, like, say, 50 dB of gain in this particular example, so take a look at this picture. It's saying 2000 hertz, because that's what's always represented on input-output functions. So in this case, 0 in, 50 out. 20 in, 70 out. 40 in, 90 out. Okay, now look at what happens at 60. As I increased from 40 to 60, how many did I go up? 20. And what did my output increase by, however? If my output here for 40 was 90, what's my output for 60? 100. So how much did my output go up by? 10. My input went up by 20, and my output went up by 10. That's a 20 to 10 ratio, or a 2 to 1 ratio. And this is how, I wrote in italics, this is how WDRC amplifies soft sounds by a lot and louder sounds by progressively less and less. So if you read on the left of this slide here, you'll see exactly what I mean. 40 input plus 50 gain, 90 output. 60 in plus 40 gain, 100 output. 80 in plus 30 gain, 110 output. So you can see that the gain is going down, down, down as the inputs go up, up, and up. So basically we saw this slide. Oh, okay, I'll just sort of take you through to take a peek at this as well. And I think this is where we will end this session. I'm going to show you this slide here so that we see exactly what we're talking about. We're going to stay on the same thought, the same train here. On the left, you're going to see that WDRC hearing aid, but now it's in terms of a frequency response. Now we're looking at a frequency response, no longer an input-output function. So look at this input-output function on the right here, and now we're going to talk about that same hearing aid in terms of frequency response. So here it is on the left. 40 in, 60 in, 80 in, and notice my gain. Here's frequency on the horizontal, gain on the vertical, and notice how my gain is less. And notice too the shape of the yellow lines. Notice how there's most in the highs and there's less gain in the lows. And that's to indicate that, like typical hearing aids, you're giving less gain in the lows because most hearing loss slopes down in the highs. So because most hearing loss slopes down in the highs, most hearing aids give most gain in the highs. So that's why I made the gains go up like a bit like a hill. And notice how 40 inputs are getting the most gain. And note how 80 inputs are getting the least gain. Now, take your attention from the yellow and move to the red. When you do so, you're moving from gain to output. So now let's look at output. Same hearing aid, exactly the same hearing aid. Instead of talking German, we're talking Polish. It's just a different language. So watch what happens. 40 in, okay, look at the very, very low frequencies here. For a soft input of 40, what was my gain at the very low frequencies? 20. Okay, so hold that thought. 40 in, and I'm looking for a gain of 20 right here where my cursor is circling. So now let's look what happens to 40 dB inputs in terms of output. Move over here, 60. Well, 40 input plus 20 dB of gain is an output of 60. Now let's look at where 40 input peaks here. Okay, so now 40 is right here. Follow my cursor. It's about 30. Okay, so if that 40 in is getting a gain of about 30, what's happening here? Look at the 40 here. My output is 70, because 40 plus 30 is 70. Look at 80 inputs, 80 decibel inputs. At this frequency right here, we're looking at a gain of 10. Okay, right here, you're looking at a gain of 10. Well, 80 inputs, what's my output? About 90. 80 plus 10 is 90. So this is what we need to take home, okay? Outputs are read, the softest input is on the bottom. The output for average inputs is in the middle. The outputs for loud inputs is on the top. But when you're talking about it in terms of gain, it's exactly the opposite. The gain for 40 inputs, for soft inputs, is at the top. The gain for loud inputs is at the bottom. And this is something we need to take home. This is something we have to incorporate. This is something we have to fix and make sure we have in our heads. That reading in gain versus reading in outputs goes exactly the opposite way. I'll highlight it with this slide. Here's a more complicated instance. Look at this graph. These two graphs tell the same story. Look at the left-hand graph here, WDRC. Unlike here, okay, where all the yellow lines are parallel, look at this one. Here they all meet at the low frequencies. This might be for somebody who has excellent hearing in the lows, so no matter what the input is, we don't want any gain at the lows, okay? So they're all together. So now look at the gain for 40, lots of high frequency gain. The average gain for 60 inputs, less, and the gain you want for loud inputs, less. Well, that's the same story as the previous one here. It's just that the gain lines all meet at the lows. All right, how now, brown cow? Look at the right. When you look at the right graph, look at how different these look. So I wanted a gain of 10 dB for all my different inputs. Okay, look where my cursor is circling. I want a gain of 10 dB for all three of my inputs. In other words, very little. Okay, when you're reading that in terms of output, well, 40 in and a gain of 10 is an output of 50. 40 in and a gain of 40 is an output of 80. Okay, so here's an input of 60. An input of 60. All right, at the low frequencies, I wanted 10 dB of gain. All right, my output then is 70. And if I wanted a gain of 30 dB for a 60 decibel input, now I'm at 90. Okay, look at 80 dB inputs. My 80 dB inputs, I wanted 10 dB of gain for 80 dB inputs. Well, my output, 90. I wanted about 20 dB of gain for an 80 decibel input at this frequency. Well, now it's 100. So the more similar that they are in terms of gain, the more different they are in terms of output. So it's just a highlight to you the differences between reading and output versus reading and gain. It's a game changer. It's a game changer. It's a gain changer. So gain versus output for input intensity changes. With gain, it decreases as inputs increase. With output, output increases as inputs increase. So I would make it one's business to look carefully at these three pictures and make them make sense to yourselves, and that way you get it. If the vertical intensity axes have the same increments, like 10 dB, then you're going to see bigger changes regarding output. No differences here, lots of difference here, and it's no rocket science, it's just arithmetic. Input plus gain is output. All right, mainly the two probe tube measures we use today, or I should say the probe tube measures we use today, focus on two families of fitting methods, NAL and DSL. Manufacturers also have proprietary fitting methods. They tend to roll off the high frequencies. We'll discuss next week why that is. Software almost always overestimates gain and output, paints a rosier picture than what you really get. Real ear almost always shows less than predicted. And we will not blame the manufacturers. Excuse me, manufacturers are using artificial intelligence. They're using mic location effects and real ear to coupler difference and the guy's hearing loss and then the fitting method, and they're adding them like blocks. This. Real ear, you're looking at it all in real time. It's all happening in real time. That's why manufacturer software is not to blame. Their job is to get us into the ballpark, but it's our job as clinicians to finish the job with real ear. Let's look in our notes to make sure we're all caught up there. Let's get out of here. This is always the where things get kind of weird. I had this in my last earlier. Good, thank you. Okay, now we'll go to here. In our notes, we get to the bottom of the of page 1 here. We've described all of this stuff. This has all been covered, and we talked about it. Okay, real ear today uses in situ REAR only. Recall REAR is output, not gain. Gain is a means to an end. Output is the delivered groceries. To newer real ear, it's all about output. Okay, carry on down. Procedure for today's real ear: enter the audiogram just like you always did. Then just do one measure, REAR. Check to see if aided outputs hit the fitting method targets for output. Newer real ear and speech mapping. Basically, we've covered this all too, and this is a fitting place to end. Okay? Newer real ear determines if aided output sits within the dynamic range displayed on the screen. DSL called this the SPLogram. AudioScan coined the word speech map. So SPLogram, speech map, same thing, synonyms, okay? Speech mapping attempts to determine where aided speech sits in the listener's dynamic range. At the bottom is MAP, at the top is UCLs. Speech mapping tends to look at outputs for 3 inputs: soft, average, and loud. Okay, how are you doing? Any questions?
Nope.
Yeah, you're good. Good stuff. Okay, Tina, thanks for showing up as you always do. And the rest of you in the class, I hope you tune into this puppy later on. Anyway, it's been a slice. I will sign off for now and grab a coffee. I need one. Maybe you do too. Anyway, I see you later.